You did not arrive here by chance. Even if your hands think they clicked this video, it was not your hands that sought this message. It was something older than your name, quieter than your thoughts, and deeper than your memories. A soft and ancient thirst that has been echoing within you for longer than you have been alive. There comes a moment when the soul stops looking for miracles and begins looking for meaning. A moment when the verses of sacred books feel hollow, not because they are false, but because something within you knows they are incomplete. And so you come to this edge, a fragile and luminous edge between forgetting and remembering. Maybe no one told you that Jesus once walked among stars before he walked among men, that he held galaxies like lilies before placing sandals on dust, that his voice, the true one, the eternal one, was never confined to pulpits or prisons of dogma. Maybe you always suspected that the real Christ has nothing to do with stained glass, guilt, or reward, and everything to do with resonance. This book is not a doctrine. It is a memory you left for yourself. It is a candle lit in the cathedral of your own becoming. The voice you are about to hear does not come from outside of you. It comes through you, not to inform, but to awaken, not to teach, but to remind. We begin by unlearning. We open this path not with certainty, but with surrender. Jan Val Ellam once received words not from men, but from silence. He wrote down what his spirit heard when it was quiet enough to receive. And among those transmissions came one that burned brighter than all, the voice of the Christ, not the one crucified by wood, but the one resurrected in stars. The Jesus of this work does not want your worship. He wants your awakening. He does not demand belief. He invites remembrance. The Jesus of this book does not belong to any nation, religion, or history. He belongs to you, or rather, to the part of you that still remembers how to bloom. He is the bridge between your humanity and your cosmic ancestry. He speaks not only to the person you are, but to the being you have always been. He is not a symbol of sacrifice, but of return. Not of rules, but of rhythm. Not of fear, but of flame. And as we walk this unfolding path, you may feel a strange familiarity. Not because you've read these things before, but because you've lived them in places your waking mind forgot, but your soul never did. This is the space between worlds, between what you know and what you are, between who you've been and what you're becoming. And now that you're here, truly here, you're ready to remember what the silence always tried to tell you. To hear what is sacred, we must first clear the noise of what is merely loud. Religions taught you to kneel, but they rarely taught you to listen. The institutions spoke of salvation, but they often forgot about transformation. They offered temples of stone while neglecting the sanctuary that was always within your chest. And yet, something in you kept searching, not for a God who punishes, but for a presence who understands. Not for miracles in the sky, but for meaning in the marrow. Not for words carved in tablets, but for whispers etched in your sleep. Jung would say that the soul speaks in symbols, not syllables. That beneath your roles and routines lives an archetype, a blueprint, older than your ancestors, deeper than your tears. It is from that place that the voice rises. Khalil Gibran called God a directionless wind, felt more in longing than in arrival, more in questions than in answers. Gurdjieff said that most people live asleep, unaware they are dreaming. To wake is to suffer, at first, but then to see, and then at last to be. Alan Watts reminded us that spirituality is not about fleeing the world, but about dancing with it, seeing the divine not in departure, but in deeper presence. He whispered, as this work now echoes, "You're not a drop in the ocean. You are the ocean in a drop." The Urantia Book speaks of a universe humming with order, where love is law, and evolution is not a punishment, but a promise. There, Jesus is not just a prophet. He is a creator, a son of divinity, choosing earth not to dominate, but to demonstrate what love looks like in skin. Jan Val Ellam heard that same voice not with his ears, but with that mysterious part of us that knows things before they're explained. Through him, words came not as commandments, but as cosmic invitations. The Christ who speaks in his pages is not the Jesus nailed to history, but the one still breathing in galaxies. And in you, if you made it this far, it is because some part of you already said yes. Yes to remembering. Yes to becoming. Yes to the possibility that the universe has not forgotten your name. This book will not give you a ladder to climb, but a mirror to see. Not a doctrine to follow, but a current to feel. Not a map to the divine, but the realization that you are already walking in the divine. Barefoot, blinking, breaking open, and radiant. So pause, breathe, let go of needing to understand, and simply allow yourself to be met, not by an idea, but by a presence. This is not a beginning. This is a return to a voice that was never outside of you, to a truth that was never lost, to a flame that was only waiting for your stillness to ignite. Let's begin. There are things we believe not because they are true, but because they are familiar. We trust the floor beneath our feet, not because we understand it, but because it rarely disappears. We trust our names, our stories, our reflection in the mirror, even though none of these are as solid as they seem. From birth, we are trained to trust the visible. To touch is to prove. To see is to believe. To measure is to understand. But what if all of it, the solid, the sure, the measurable, is simply a veil woven from habit and hope? Plato once said that we are like prisoners in a cave, watching shadows on a wall, believing they are reality. He tried to wake us, to tell us that what we call real is only light distorted. And even though millennia have passed, we are still in that cave. Only now the walls are made of glass, and the shadows are digital. The voice of Christ, as received by Jan Val Ellam, returns to this truth with startling clarity. You are dreaming, he says, and the dream feels so real because you have forgotten that you are the dreamer. In a world of calendars and clocks, of walls and wages, this message doesn't just sound foreign, it sounds dangerous. For if the world we touch is not ultimate reality, then what becomes of our systems, our laws, our ambitions, our fears? The Urantia Book echoes the same disturbance, not as a warning, but as an invitation. Time and space, it reveals, are not absolutes, but training grounds, a temporary framework through which eternal souls evolve. Matter is the stage, not the substance. We are not citizens of Earth. We are pilgrims passing through a very convincing theater. And the moment we begin to suspect the illusion, everything begins to shimmer with meaning. Donald Hoffman, a cognitive scientist, reminds us that evolution did not design our perceptions for truth, but for survival. Our senses are not windows. They are interfaces, constructed to filter just enough data to keep us functioning, while hiding almost all of reality's true architecture. Like icons on a desktop, what we see is not what is, but a symbol of what would overwhelm us if unfiltered. Descartes once doubted everything, and in that doubt found a one unshakable certainty. Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But even this I that thinks is itself not immune to illusion. Who is the thinker? Is it the mind, the brain, the body? Or is it the consciousness behind the mind? The silent awareness that watches your thoughts rise and fall like fog on water? Jung would call it the self, the archetypal center from which all personas and projections emerge. He knew that the ego clings to the illusion because it fears the vastness beyond it. To awaken is to dissolve the tight frame of identity and step into something unnameable. And yet, this is the very work that Christ invites us to do. Not worship from a distance, but dissolve into the knowing that the Christ lives where the illusion ends. This is not a rejection of the world, but a re-seeing of it. The fog does not need to be hated. It needs to be seen for what it is. A temporary veil, not the face beneath. A hologram, yes, but even holograms carry echoes of light. The mirror may not be the truth, but the reflection can still lead you home. To challenge what feels real is to meet resistance, not from the world, but from within. Because as Jung understood, the ego, our sense of self, builds itself around the illusion of certainty. What we think we are is often just a character we've learned to play in the drama of life. The more we cling to the roles of I am this, I am that, the less we experience the vastness that is. But what happens when the dream is questioned? What happens when a mind stops believing in the shadows on the wall? Descartes' famous words, I think, therefore I am, rest on the premise that thought is the only certainty we can trust. But even Descartes' thinking mind was constrained within a boundary of belief. Was this I? Is it the thinker, the observer, the actor in the world? And if the mind is capable of such deep illusion, what can we trust then in this world we call real? Here, Plato's allegory of the cave becomes an urgent invitation. The prisoners in the cave were not chained by metal, but by belief. They believed the shadows on the wall were all there was, because it was the only thing they could see. But the truth, the sun, was outside, just beyond their reach, waiting for them to break free from the chains of perception. This is what the Christ message brings us. That what we see is not what is. That we must wake from the collective dream we are sleeping through. The Urantia Book echoes this ancient wisdom, teaching that time and space are not the eternal fabric of reality, but the temporary, evolving conditions in which the soul learns and grows. We exist not in the confines of the physical realm, but as travelers passing through it. This world is not the end of the journey. It is the means by which we learn to see beyond it. The revelation of the cosmic self, the divine presence within us all, is hidden not in the world we know, but in the awareness of our own transcendence. Donald Hoffman, in his research, suggests that our perception of reality is not an accurate reflection of the world, but a simplified interface designed to help us survive. Imagine that our senses are nothing but a cosmic user interface, a screen that shows us just enough to navigate life, but hides the complexity of the universe. Like an app on a phone, the user does not see the operating system beneath it. We see a flat surface of symbols, icons, and screens, but beneath it all lies an infinite system we are incapable of fully comprehending. What if this world, this reality we experience, is like that? A hologram designed to help us play the game, but one that masks the deeper truth of existence? It is in this very distortion that we find the teachings of Jesus, as relayed by Jan Val Ellam. You are sleeping in a collective dream, he says. The world is not as it seems, and yet we carry on as though it were. But when you awaken, the dream dissolves, and you step into the light of true seeing. This is not an awakening to an external truth, but to an internal knowing, where you are the dreamer and the dream, the watcher and the watched, the illusion and the reality, all at once. This is the paradox. The more we let go of the world as we know it, the more we find that the true world was never outside us, but within us, always. When we begin to see through the veil of the illusion, we come to realize that the symbols of fog, mirrors, and holograms are not just images, but the very vehicles of our awakening. We must pass through the fog, look into the mirror, and recognize that the reflection is not separate from the one who sees it. We must learn to see the hologram not as a fake, but as a tool, a way to teach us the deeper truth. For the illusion, in its essence, is not something to fight against. It is something to transcend. To awaken from the illusion is not to escape the world, but to finally see it rightly. Maya, as spoken of in ancient Hindu philosophy, is not evil. It is the sacred dream, the divine play, Lila, where form dances for a while in the realm of the formless. It is not the illusion that deceives, but our belief that it is all there is. To see through Maya is not to reject reality, but to bow before its hidden layers, to realize that everything tangible is an echo of something unspeakably vast. Kant once observed that we can never know the thing in itself, only the phenomena as they appear to our senses. Space and time, for Kant, are not things out there, but conditions of our perception. Reality does not arrive in raw form. It arrives already filtered, shaped, refracted through the lens of human cognition. We do not see the world, we interpret it. And most of us, without ever knowing it, are living within the interpretation of an interpretation. This is why the words of the Christ, as transmitted through Jan Val Ellam, pierce with such clarity. You are dreaming, he says, but you have mistaken the dream for yourself. Not because the world is unreal, but because you are more real than the world. The Urantia Book amplifies this by describing the universe as a training field, a great cosmic school wherein souls grow through experience. It teaches us that time is not a trap, but a tool. That space is not a prison, but a path. Reality is always deeper than what is perceived, and the visible realm is only the surface of a vast and living cosmos, teeming with mind, intention, and spirit. When the illusions begin to crumble, when the fog begins to thin, and the mirror begins to melt, a different kind of seeing is born. Not the seeing of the eyes, but the recognition of the soul. It is the moment when the hologram becomes transparent, not vanishing, but glowing with the light of the real. In this light, even illusions serve. Even a shadow points to the flame. Even the false has something true to whisper. If we have ears to hear beneath the noise, this is not a war against the unreal, but an awakening into the unspoken, a gentle parting of the veil. You may find, now, that the questions which used to torment you are no longer weights, but windows, that the fears which once gripped your chest begin to soften in the presence of something vaster than thought, that the craving to be right gives way to the longing to be real. This is not an end, but a door through which you are being gently called, not to abandon this world, but to walk through it awake, to see the fog and know it as fog, to look into the mirror and recognize the witness, to enter the hologram not as a victim, but as a traveler, a soul with memory deeper than time, and vision waiting to return. What lies ahead is not certainty, but clarity, not answers, but presence, not facts, but flames. And as we step beyond the illusion that once felt real, we begin to feel the real that once seemed like an illusion. And in that subtle inversion, we remember, let's walk forward, not with fear, but with flame. There are names so frequently spoken that they become hollow, like coins passed through too many hands. They lose their weight, their warmth, their mystery. Jesus is one of those names. We have heard it on street corners and in stadiums, on lips trembling in prayer and mouths twisted in judgment. We have seen his image painted in countless ways. Pale-skinned, soft-eyed, bleeding, glowing, made in the image not of truth, but of the culture that needed him to be manageable. But what if we never really knew him? What if the Jesus we were taught to love or fear was not the one who walked among the stars before he walked among men? This chapter is not about the Jesus of religion. It is about the Jesus behind the curtain, beneath the symbols, beyond the sermons, the one whose voice has never stopped echoing through the soul of the universe. Jan Val Ellam encountered that voice, not in cathedrals or scriptures, but in the vast silence where the cosmos meets the spirit. The Jesus who spoke to him was not the tragic figure hung on a cross, but the cosmic intelligence that holds galaxies in compassion. He was not a prophet, not merely a teacher, but a universal brother, a consciousness that breathes across dimensions and whispers to every soul willing to listen without fear. And then there is Urantia, a revelation not bound by creed or tradition, but offering a new cosmology, one in which Jesus is not just a savior, but a creator son, a divine architect of time and space, who chose to incarnate here, on this tiny and troubled planet, not to be worshipped, but to reveal the Father and model a new kind of life, a life infused with love, truth, beauty, and goodness. This Jesus does not ask for altars. He asks for awakening. He is not the emblem of guilt, but the embodiment of grace. He does not demand belief. He invites relationship. He does not punish sin. He illuminates the shadows in which it hides. Teilhard Chardin once wrote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." But Jesus, in this new vision, is more than either. He is the bridge between the two. He is the thread that runs from divinity to dust, from eternity into the moment you are now living. He is what it means to be fully human and fully divine, not in abstract doctrine, but in living presence. Swedenborg, centuries before Urantia or Ellam, saw visions of a spiritual universe, in which Jesus reigned not from a throne, but from within the heart of all that is good. He described a divine humanity, a radiant warmth that reached even into the coldest shadows of the afterlife. For him, Jesus was not just a figure in time, but the form through which divine love becomes visible. And Khalil Gibran, the poet of the eternal soul, dared to write of Jesus not as a God to be praised, but as a man to be understood, a lover of the broken, a rebel against rigidity, a wanderer whose only homeland was the human heart. These voices, Ellam, Urantia, Gibran, Swedenborg, Teilhard, do not contradict each other. They harmonize like strings on an invisible lyre, each note giving shape to a deeper music. The Jesus they unveil is not the one you learned in Sunday school, not the mascot of a religion or the idol of an empire. He is older than time, gentler than doctrine, and closer than your own breath. To rediscover him, we must first allow ourselves to let go of what we were told to believe. For centuries, Jesus has been wrapped in robes that do not fit him. Nationalistic robes, dogmatic robes, sacrificial robes stitched from guilt and glory. But if you listen closely, not with your ears, but with that trembling place inside your chest, you'll find his voice has always been whispering something else. Not a command, not a creed, but a call. The Jesus who speaks through Jan Val Ellam never once asked for followers. He does not beg to be adored. He does not hunger for temples built in his name. Instead, he asks if you are ready to remember who you are. He calls you not to bow before him, but to walk beside him. He does not lift you up to worship. He meets you in the dust, in the ache, in the question. This Jesus is not above us. He is with us, and more than that, he is within us. A latent frequency waiting to be tuned, a cosmic flame waiting to be kindled by choice. This reframing is echoed with crystalline clarity in the Urantia Book, where Jesus is not a miracle worker sent to fix a broken world, but a voluntary emissary of love, one of many creator sons who choose to incarnate on evolutionary worlds to demonstrate how divine presence can become human practice. He came not to erase suffering, but to show how love walks through suffering with dignity, how light enters shadow without losing itself. He did not come to rescue us from Earth, but to awaken Earth to what it could become. His life was a revelation in motion, each gesture a teaching, each silence a sermon. And still we missed it, because we were looking for power, and he offered peace. We were waiting for a king, and he came as a child. We wanted vengeance, and he brought mercy. We asked for signs in the sky, and he wrote the message into our hearts instead. Tile-hard to Chardon, with the soul of both mystic and scientist. So Christ not as a historical figure, but as the divine axis of evolution itself. What he called the omega point, the luminous center toward which all consciousness is moving. For Teilhard, Jesus is not an interruption of history, but its fulfillment, the future echoing back into the now. He is not just the man of Nazareth. He is the radiant pull of all creation toward unity. And yet, for all the grandeur that Teilhard perceived, there is something even more intimate in the simplicity of the Jesus presented by Ellam. Not distant, not cosmic in the way that creates separation, but cosmic in the way that creates belonging. He is a brother, yes, but not in metaphor. In essence, he is what you are becoming, and what you always were, if only you could peel back the layers of forgetting. Swedenborg adds to this unfolding portrait, not with theological treatise, but with the tenderness of a man who saw heaven open. For him, Jesus is the divine made approachable, a warmth that permeates the cold mechanics of religion. He writes of inner worlds, where the soul continues to grow after death, guided not by punishment, but by love. And at the center of that love, always, is Christ, not throned, but present. Khalil Gibran, ever the prophet of yearning, portrayed Jesus as the wanderer who walks alone, because his truth is too vast for temples and too soft for empires. In Gibran's vision, Jesus is the weaver of broken lives, a poet of the unseen, whose miracles were not in defiance of nature, but in deeper harmony with it. All these voices converge toward one truth, that Jesus is not who we made him to be. He is more and also less. Less in the sense of titles, distance, doctrine, more in the sense of presence, intimacy, possibility. He is not just the path. He is the one walking beside you as you take each trembling step. The greatest truths are not those that arrive with thunder, but those that arise in silence. Soft truths that do not force themselves upon you, but wait patiently until your soul is ready to recognize them. Jesus is one of those truths. We try to define him. We try to contain him within theology, ritual, expectation. We dressed him in robes of royalty or stripped him with doctrines of sacrifice. We made him an icon, a weapon, a slogan, a savior. But rarely, so rarely, do we sit still long enough to let him be. And if we did, if we could, we might begin to notice that he never really went anywhere. Not because he returned from the dead in a blaze of glory, but because he never truly left the living. He is the presence behind your longing, the quiet you feel just before a breakthrough, the peace that visits you without explanation in moments of great confusion. He is not a memory. He is movement, a rhythm pulsing through your becoming, a breath not taken by lungs, but by the soul learning how to breathe again. The Jesus of this unfolding revelation is not a stranger to suffering, but he is not confined by it. He is the one who enters suffering not to explain it away, but to sit beside you in it, to transmute it not into answers, but into deeper presence. He does not promise to erase your pain. He promises that it will not be wasted, that every tear you have wept has watered something sacred within you, something that will bloom when you are ready to remember who you are. He is the Christ of quiet revolutions. He turns over tables not to destroy, but to reveal the falseness beneath them. He speaks not in commands, but in questions that rearrange the soul. He is not here to dominate. He is here to mirror, to show you what it looks like to live without fear, without masks, without separation. You are not asked to worship him. You are asked to see him, not in a painting or story, but in the stranger who needs your compassion, in the wound you've tried to hide, in the voice that whispers forgive, when everything inside you wants to close. You're not asked to agree with doctrine. You're asked to listen with your entire being, to notice how your chest responds when love enters without condition, when truth arrives not as dogma, but as light. And in the end, perhaps Jesus is not someone we need to understand. Perhaps he is someone we must encounter, again and again, in the mystery, in the mundane, in the mirror. And when we do, when the veil of familiarity is finally lifted, we may find that the Christ we've been searching for was never behind the curtain at all, but was the one pulling it open from within us, patiently, tenderly, all along. It is easy to feel trapped here. The weight of repetition, the ache of not knowing, the tight loops of loss and longing. They can make the world feel like a cell, and time like a sentence we never agreed to serve. So many souls walk the earth as if under a punishment they don't remember earning. The gravity not just under their feet, but inside their chests. The burden not only of survival, but of meaninglessness. And in that heaviness, a question rises, sometimes whispered in silence, sometimes shouted through sleepless nights. Why are we here? The ancient belief that Earth is a place of exile runs deep. A fallen realm, a cursed plane, a karmic stopover for the impure. Religions have called it a battleground. Mystics have called it a dream. But the soul, when it listens closely, knows something more. That this place, for all its sorrow, is not a prison. It is a portal. The Urantia Book speaks of Earth. Urantia as a young and struggling world, one not yet aligned with the harmonious systems of more evolved spheres. But it does not speak of our world with pity or condemnation. It speaks with reverence. For to incarnate here is to take on the most demanding curriculum in the cosmic school. It is to agree before remembering to enter density, to experience pain and still choose love, to be born into forgetting and still seek the light, to walk through confusion and still trust a rhythm deeper than thought. Jan Val Ellam reminds us that souls do not come to earth as punishment, but as volunteers, beings of ancient light who enter this dense realm, not to escape karma, but to transform it. We are not victims of the world. We are participants in a sacred unfolding, not trapped by matter, but invited to awaken within it. Viktor Frankl, who survived the unspeakable, wrote that suffering, when given meaning, becomes a path. That even in the darkest corners of humanity, a person can choose dignity. He discovered that purpose is not found in avoiding pain, but in moving through it with the courage to remain human. Pain does not strip us of meaning. It reveals the places where meaning was waiting to emerge. Rolome, too, spoke of the human condition not as pathology, but as potential. Anxiety, he said, is not a sign of failure, but a signal, a sign that the soul is stretching, pushing against the boundaries of its own becoming. The discomfort we feel is not the proof of imprisonment. It is the tremor of transformation. And so this world, with all its wounds, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a mirror, not to what we have done, but to what we are capable of becoming. It becomes a fire, not to burn us, but to burn away what is false. It becomes a doorway, not out of life, but deeper into it. What if your pain was never meant to break you, but to beckon you? Not a punishment inflicted from above, but a pressure created from within, to shape, to deepen, to awaken. Pain, when seen through the eyes of the soul, is not the sign of divine abandonment. It is the echo of your own readiness. It arrives not as a curse, but as a hidden calling, a doorway dressed in shadow. And when we step through it consciously, the world begins to shift from punishment to passage. The teachings of Jan Val Ellam remind us that we are not random bodies lost in a meaningless cosmos, but souls in training, eternal presences clothed in temporary forms. Earth is not a trap. It is a field, alive with invisible instructors, curved with sacred assignments tailored to each soul's blueprint. No one comes here by mistake. No one suffers without seed. And even if the reasons feel lost in time, the fruit will ripen in eternity. The soul, he says, agrees to earth with full awareness of the density, the risk, the forgetting. But it also comes with the certainty that somewhere within the forgetting, a remembering will ignite, that the very veils we call hardship will one day be recognized as thresholds, that the fire we once feared was actually the light we asked for, in a language we had not yet learned to speak. Urantia speaks of Earth not as a fallen planet, but as a misdirected one, a world delayed in its harmonization, but not lost. It holds that even in our spiritual immaturity, we are guided, even when planetary mistakes unfold. As with the rebellion of celestial beings, there remains a universal plan that bends slowly and surely toward restoration. It tells us that the planetary life is but the first rung in a vast spiral of ascension, that to be born on Urantia is to begin a journey through worlds of increasing beauty, light, and understanding. But the path does not skip the dirt. It begins here, in gravity and grief, in laughter and blood, in holding a body whose fragility teaches the soul how to care. And still, we ask, why must the curriculum begin with suffering? Why can't awakening come in gentler ways? The soul does not ask for ease. It asks for truth. And truth, in the raw atmosphere of Earth, is often delivered by contrast. We know light by being broken by the dark. We know presence by surviving absence. We learn compassion not by being spared from pain, but by walking with others through it, hand in hand, wound to wound. Viktor Frankl found this truth not in books, but in barracks. He discovered that the soul, stripped of everything, can still choose meaning. And in that choice, there is power, a quiet defiance of despair. He did not claim that suffering is good. He claimed that it can become good if we refuse to let it make us smaller. Rolome echoed that inner evolution is not born in safety, but in creative tension. That growth arrives not in the absence of anxiety, but in the dance with it. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act from the soul, even when fear shouts louder than faith. So perhaps this world is not here to punish you. Perhaps it is here to teach you how to become a world within yourself. One that doesn't collapse when things fall apart. One that still sings when the sky turns black. one that becomes a living answer to the question, what does it mean to be human and divine? In a place where both seem impossible, when you begin to see the world as a classroom and not a cage, everything changes. The wounds no longer feel like cosmic errors, but invitations to grow where you thought nothing could survive. The losses no longer point to injustice, but to the soul's secret curriculum, a pattern too large to see from within a single lifetime, yet too intimate to be accidental. What if every heartbreak was a rehearsal for compassion? What if the loneliness was carving a deeper space for presence? What if the betrayals were the pressure needed to break the shell of ego and expose the radiant vulnerability beneath it? What if this world, with all its apparent violence and fragility, was precisely calibrated to awaken a level of consciousness that could never emerge in comfort? Jan Val Ellam has long said that the greatest initiations do not occur in temples, but in traffic, in tension, in tears. Earth is not a place where gods walk in ease. It is where they learn to walk in skin. It is where the divine becomes intimate, where the infinite puts on a heartbeat and says, "Now, let me remember who I am." The prison dissolves when the soul remembers its mission, not a grand, showy mission with thunder and accolades, but the quiet and luminous knowing that your existence itself is a transmission. You are not here to escape life. You are here to transmute it, to take the heaviness and learn to breathe light into it. Urantia expands this vision by showing the next chapters. After this life, after this planet, this world is not a final destination, but a beginning. It is where the soul awakens to the reality that it belongs to a vast and living universe, woven in love, guided by intelligence, and pulsing with divine intention. Every act of love, every inner surrender, every moment of clarity ripples beyond this world into higher realms of evolution. And as we move through the planetary stages, we're shaped by experience, guided by celestial beings, and eventually called to co-create, not just on Earth, but in worlds yet unborn. This is not a prison. It is the first classroom of eternity. It is the furnace in which the soul is not punished, but polished. It is the wilderness where the Christ within you learns how to take its first trembling steps. And perhaps that is why you came, not to flee the dark, but to learn how to hold a lantern. You are not forgotten here. You are not delayed. You are not small. You are in the middle of the sacred. You're the proof that Earth is working. Because even now, in the midst of ache, uncertainty, and time, you're still choosing to rise, to learn, to love, and to remember what you came to do. There is a silence in the stars that unsettles the soul, not because it is empty, but because it is full of presence, full of questions, full of something we can almost feel, but have not yet learned to hear. We look up at the night sky and wonder if we're being watched. But the better question may be, are we watching ourselves well enough to be seen? For centuries, humanity has searched the heavens for voices, vessels, visitors. And yet, the sky remains largely quiet, its stillness more deafening than noise. But silence is not absence. Silence is often the language of those who are waiting for us to stop asking the wrong questions. They do not announce themselves with spectacle. They arrive, if they arrive at all, in thresholds, in moments when the mind loosens and the soul begins to stretch. Jacques Vallée, perhaps more mystic than scientist, long ago warned us that we were looking for spaceships, when we should have been looking for meaning. That these encounters, when they happen, are not simply physical, but psycho-spiritual dislocations, cracks in the illusion of our separateness. He suggested that these beings, if that word even applies, do not come from elsewhere. but from elsewhere, not another place, but a dimension that brushes ours like wind against skin. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist who dared to listen to those who claimed contact, discovered that the experience was never just about lights in the sky. It was about transformation. People returned from these encounters, not with answers, but with new questions, not with maps to other planets, but with deep tears in the fabric of their former lives, openings that refused to close. And always, these encounters carried a common thread. They dismantled the ego. They made it harder to cling to personal narratives, to the illusion of human supremacy, to the arrogance of thinking this earth, this form, this story was all there is. Jan Val Ellam echoes this reversal. The beings that approach us, he writes, do so with ethical restraint. They do not force. They do not prove. They do not entertain. They wait. They wait not for our technology to catch up, but for our ethics to mature. They wait for our resonance to rise, for our fear to soften, for our light to become less reactive and more reflective. Urantia confirms this, describing a universe teeming with intelligent life, layered in dimensions, governed not by power, but by law, love, and luminous hierarchy. It speaks of celestial beings and planetary administrators, of evolutionary paths and spiritual administrators, of worlds in collaboration, not in conquest. And yet, despite the vastness of that galactic family, Urantia tells us plainly, we will not join that greater communion until we are prepared, not by force, not by invention, but by inner alignment. The stars are not close to us. They are only waiting. We have mistaken noise for readiness. We have mistaken invention for evolution. We believed that sending machines into space would make us part of the cosmos. But the real voyage begins inward, not in rockets, but in stillness, not in reaching out, but in clearing the static within, so that when the voice beyond voices comes, we are capable of hearing it. The silence of the sky is not abandonment. It is discipline, a sacred delay. It is the kind of silence a wise teacher gives when the student is not ready to hear the lesson. It is the silence between notes, without which music would be unbearable. It is the space that demands presence before it offers revelation. Jacques Vallée warned us against turning the mystery into spectacle. He saw that many sought answers, but few were willing to become the kind of beings that could live in alignment with those answers. The phenomena he studied moved like dreams, fluid, elusive, symbolic. They left impressions more than evidence, rearranged perception more than they rearranged facts. He believed the visitors, if we dare call them that, were not merely here to be discovered. They were here to mirror us, to show us not what is out there, but what we have yet to face in ourselves. John Mack really listened, and what he found was not insanity, but transformation. The individuals who had encountered others were not collecting proof. They were being undone. Undone in the sense that illusions were falling away, false identities shedding like skins. They were left raw and bewildered, but also strangely illuminated, as if touched by something that refused to fit inside the framework of science or belief. The true contact, it seemed, was not with aliens, but with the sacred unknown, an intelligence that was both outside and inside, beyond and within, as if the stars were whispering secrets we could only hear when our pride went silent. Jan Val Ellam suggests that true contact cannot be initiated until there is an inner shift, a preparation of frequency. We do not summon these beings by desire, but by resonance. And resonance cannot be faked. It cannot be manufactured. It arises when intention, ethics, and energy converge. into coherence. This is why the sky remains silent to the loud and curious, but opens gently to the humble and aligned. This is why many see lights, but few are transformed. The contact is not technological. It is relational. It is not proof we must earn, but presence. The Urantia Book affirms this sacred prerequisite. In the universe, contact is not a right. It is a responsibility. Before a world may join the larger galactic order, it must demonstrate not sophistication of machines, but maturity of heart. It must prove that it can care for its weakest, that it can govern itself with justice, that it can host truth without crucifying it. Until then, we remain watched, not with judgment, but with caution, not with indifference, but with hope. We are surrounded by unseen eyes, not surveilling us, but waiting for our emergence, the way a gardener waits for seeds to break the soil. At the right season, we are not alone, but aloneness is not the question. The question is, are we ready to meet what has already been waiting for us? Not in the sky, but in the vibration of our becoming. We often imagine that if a ship descended from the sky tomorrow, everything would change. Wars would stop, hearts would open, truth would spread like sunlight through shadow. But transformation does not begin with arrival. It begins with readiness. And readiness is not excitement. It is humility. It is the willingness to unlearn, to soften, to listen for voices that do not speak in language, but in frequency, in subtle impressions, inner stirrings, gentle disruptions of all we thought we knew. The civilizations that observe us, if they do, are not waiting for us to advance our science. They are waiting for us to advance our sincerity. They're not drawn to our telescopes, but to our capacity for peace. Not to our inventions, but to the way we treat the vulnerable, the way we respond to injustice, the way we whisper kindness even when no one is listening. And that is why most have not yet arrived in full. Not because we are too primitive, but because we are not yet safe. Not safe in the sense of weaponry, but in consciousness. We have not yet learned how to encounter the unfamiliar without trying to conquer it. We have not yet matured beyond our reflex to dominate what we do not understand. Jan Val Ellam has often said that the deeper contact is not a spectacle for the senses, but a sacred agreement of soul fields. It happens in silence, in vibration, in moments where fear has loosened its grip enough for wonder to take its rightful place. And those moments cannot be scheduled. They can only be allowed. The Urantia Book speaks of spiritual administration across the universe, of unseen but loving hierarchies, guiding planetary evolution with infinite patience. It describes our planet not as abandoned, but as observed with compassion. It reminds us that the path to cosmic citizenship is paved with inner integrity, with small daily acts of grace that shift the magnetic field of humanity. One choice at a time. The watchers in the sky do not need to see our cleverness. They need to feel our coherence. They do not test our intelligence, but our alignment. They wait, as all wise mentors do, for the pupil to look up, not in desperation, but in remembrance. And when that moment comes, not as a date, but as a resonance, the veil will thin, not as a spectacle, but as a stillness, not as arrival, but as recognition, a familiar feeling in the marrow, a breath that feels not like yours, but like something that was always with you and has finally come forward again. Until then, the silence remains. Not cold, but expectant. The stars still watch. The eyes still wait. The voices, though voiceless, still hum beneath the veil, singing to the seeds we carry within. And those seeds, buried beneath the noise, the fear, the forgetting, are beginning to stir. Because we are not alone, but we were never meant to be found. until we remembered how to bloom. Before there was light, there was love, not the love that trembles on lips or breaks hearts in poems, but the love that knows, the love that moves, the love that becomes. If the universe has a language, it is not written in particles or formulas. It is whispered in attraction, in order, in the way galaxies spiral with the same grace as seashells, in the way stars are born in silence, and still warm the skin of children who do not yet know the word cosmic. That language is love, not sentimental, but structural, not romantic, but relational in the deepest sense. It is the force that holds everything in tension and in tenderness. The mystic Ibn Arabi called love the only reality, writing that God created the world to be known, and that knowing was not intellectual, but the ecstasy of union. He believed that love was not one of God's qualities. It was God's very essence. He spoke of the world as a mirror in which the divine looks upon itself, and every face, every form, every unfolding is the beloved seeing the beloved. Khalil Gibran, in his delicate boldness, wrote that love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. He saw love not as possession, but as fire, not the fire that burns, but the fire that transfigures. To love, for him, was not to own, but to become the space in which the other is free to flower. His Jesus did not teach doctrine. He lived as love, love that walks, listens, weeps, and forgives without flinching. Amram Mikhail Ivanov spoke of love as the highest form of intelligence. He taught that love is not something we feel occasionally, but the substance we are made of, the current that returns us to wholeness and restores the divine image within. For Ivanov, to think clearly was to love wisely, and to love truly was to be aligned with the very geometry of creation. Jan Val Ellam, too, receives and delivers this truth not as abstraction, but as presence. His Jesus does not speak of love as an obligation. He radiates it. He does not command you to feel. He asks you to remember that you were not created out of necessity, but out of joy, that the cosmos is not a machine, but a body in love with itself, and that every pain you have ever known was never proof of love's absence, but the aching signal that you still long for its return. In the Urantia Book, love is the center of divine administration. The Father does not rule through fear, nor even through righteousness, but through affection so absolute that it becomes the logic of the universe itself. In Urantia, the laws of light and gravity are not separate from love. They're its outer clothing, the circuits of divine will, the ministries of angels, the decisions of celestial overseers, all move in harmony with love's symmetry. Love is not beneath the structure. It is the structure. And this Christ, this Jesus who is more than man, more than myth, he is not just a teacher of love. He is its logos, its vibration, its living flame made visible in form. Love does not rush. It does not arrive with fire and spectacle. It comes like breath, slow, rhythmic, often unnoticed, until something constricts and we finally realize how essential it has always been. If God is love, then love is not one of many qualities in the universe. It is the fabric beneath them all. It is not a decoration on top of physics, but the heartbeat beneath it. It is not the reward for obedience, but the source of being. It is not the answer. It is the atmosphere in which questions are made holy. To be aligned with love is not to be soft or weak. It is to become precise in compassion. It is to radiate without controlling. It is to walk into a room and shift it not with words, but with presence. The Christ who embodies this is not a man remembered. He is a force ongoing, the Logos, the eternal Word, not in Scripture, but in structure. He is what light feels like when it becomes kindness, what truth feels like when it puts down its sword, what power becomes when it kneels in humility. Jan Val Ellam does not separate Jesus from love, because to do so would be like separating flame from fire. In the messages Ellam receives, Jesus speaks not as one who learned love, but as one who is love remembering itself in form. His every gesture is an act of alignment. His every silence a confirmation of presence. He is not trying to change you. He's trying to show you that what you call you has always contained the seed of something far more luminous. Gibran captures this Christ in metaphor, not nailed to a cross, but suspended in the mystery of human longing. He writes of Jesus as one who walks among fishermen, not to turn them into saints, but to awaken the sacred ordinary, the kind of holiness that lives in crusted hands and dusty feet, in laughter between strangers, in the stillness of two people who simply know each other without needing to speak. And what is that knowing, if not the highest expression of love? Not love that possesses, but love that recognizes. Not love that demands, but love that witnesses. Ivanhoe often said that true love does not bind. It illuminates. It does not enclose. It expands. And when it is present, everything finds its proper place, not through hierarchy, but through harmony. The Urantia Book reveals that divine love is not abstract. It functions. It guides the placement of worlds and the ministry of spirits. It coordinates the responsibilities of angelic beings, and it touches the hearts of mortals without fanfare. It is the most personal force in the universe, because it knows your name, but even more, it knows your essence, and it calls to that essence, again and again, in ways you may not always recognize, but have always somehow felt. Perhaps that is why love hurts so much when it is distorted, because we were not made to live without it, because the soul recognizes when its environment does not match its origin, because every absence of love in this world is a subtle echo of a deeper presence that we came here to remember. The farther we drift from love, the more complex our systems become. We build structures to protect what love would naturally heal. We create laws where understanding would suffice. We seek control in the absence of communion. But love, when it is allowed to lead, simplifies everything without making anything shallow. It clarifies without diminishing the mystery. And mystery is where love breathes best. The universe is not a cold machine grinding toward entropy. It is a conscious unfolding, alive, aware, reaching for itself through form. Every nebula is a sentence in the great love letter of being. Every cell that divides, every star that dies, every breath taken by one who still believes in beauty is part of that silent grammar that only the heart can read. Ibn Arabi taught that love is the veil and the unveiling, that it both hides and reveals the divine, that to love deeply is to hold paradox without needing resolution, to know that you are part of God and yet distinct, to know that your longing is not a flaw, but the most sacred signal, that you were made for communion. This is the language Christ came to restore, not the language of empire or ritual, but the language that the soul spoke before it knew how to use words, the language of touch, of gaze, of the stillness that trembles just before a tear is shed. He came not only to preach love, but to become it, to incarnate what it means, to be fully divine and fully relational. Jan Val Ellam's Christ does not ask you to worship love. He invites you to participate in it, To remember that every thought not rooted in love is a distortion not of morality, but of reality itself. And that the more we love, truly love, the more we begin to remember what it feels like to be aligned with the fabric of the stars. Amram Ivanhov taught that love creates order, not by force, but by resonance. That love is what tunes the soul like a stringed instrument, bringing it into harmony with the divine music that has no composer, because it has always been playing. And Urantia, in its vast and often complex cosmology, returns always to this one law. That love is not only the foundation of divine will, is the form that divine will takes. When it becomes personal, it is not distant, it is not theoretical. It moves through angels, yes, but it also moves through you right now, in the choice you make when no one is watching, in the kindness you offer when it is not deserved, in the patience you show when you could have turned away. This is how the universe evolves, not only through the rotation of stars, but through the unseen gestures of those who choose love when fear would be easier. These are the silent revolutions. These are the songs that shape eternity. You are not here to search for love, as if it were missing. You are here to realize that was always what you were made of. And the moment you remember, not as an idea, but as a cellular knowing, the universe begins to speak again, not in words, but in warmth. Because love was never something you had to earn. It was the language you forgot how to listen to. And now, you are beginning to hear it again. You have been many things, more than you remember, more than this body could ever contain. Before this breath, you are still breathing, not through lungs, but through longing, not through form, but through fire. There are fragments within you that do not belong to this name. Tendencies, fears, affinities, languages you've never studied but somehow understand. Places you've never visited but feel like homesickness. Eyes you've met once and recognized instantly. This world calls it mystery, but the soul calls it memory. Jan Val Ellam writes not of one life, but of many. He speaks of beings who descend from light, into flesh, into time, into matter, not as punishment, but as mission. He says, "You have come from many worlds," and something within you does not argue. It listens, not because it is convinced, but because it remembers. Not all journeys are horizontal. Some are vertical, spanning not miles, but dimensions. Some souls are not new to existence. They are only new to this version of it, new to this atmosphere, this gravity, this forgetting, but old in wisdom, old in ache, old in light. Reincarnation is not just about returning. It is about becoming, not a circle that repeats, but a spiral that ascends. Not karma as punishment, but karma as choreography. An elegant unfolding of cause and response. An intelligence that teaches through reflection. What no doctrine could ever explain. The Gnostics knew this long before it was written. They taught that the soul is a spark exiled into density, longing to return to the pleroma, the fullness, the source. But return does not mean escape. It means integration, not to leave the body behind, but to awaken the divine within it, to lift the fallen light, not by fleeing, but by remembering. Urantia, though it does not describe reincarnation in the classic sense, still speaks of the soul's ongoing progression through multiple stages, realms, and experiences. After this life, if the soul is still hungry for truth, it awakens on a new plane, with a new form suited for that world, not reborn into forgetfulness, but received into deeper responsibility. The body changes, but the essence remains. There is no backward motion, only unfolding. And so we begin to see that who you are is not confined to who you appear to be. This skin is temporary. This name is borrowed. but the light moving through your gaze. That is ancient, and it is becoming again what it never stopped being. To say you've lived before is not to anchor yourself to past timelines. It is to recognize that your soul is not new to the weight of form, not surprised by sorrow, not unfamiliar with the feeling of being a stranger in your own life, because you have worn other names, spoken through other mouths, breathed other winds, and yet, through every version, there is something constant, a thread, a light, a frequency that is not erased by death, but carved more clearly into your eternal memory. With every passage through time, Roberto Assagioli called this thread the higher self, the enduring point of synthesis, beyond the chaos of temporary identities. He taught that our growth is not linear, but integrative, that the soul expands through the weaving of many selves, into one conscious flame, not by erasing the past, but by redeeming it, by gathering the fragments and making them luminous. This gathering happens not just between lifetimes, but within them. Sometimes we awaken in this life to pains that did not begin here, fears that have no current cause, gifts we never learned but somehow own. We think we are one story, but we are a library. Peter Dinov taught that reincarnation is the rhythm by which love matures. He saw life not as a series of mistakes to be corrected, but as a slow unfolding of divine beauty. Through many seasons of soul, each incarnation a lesson in giving, each experience a test of truth, and behind all of it, a divine intelligence orchestrating the choreography of awakening. Sri Aurobindo, in his vast clarity, spoke not only of return, but of descent, the divine entering into matter, not to escape, but to transform it. He saw reincarnation as the method by which consciousness educates itself until it becomes radiant enough to be divine in body, not just in essence. He did not call for heaven after death. He called for heaven through incarnation, here now in the visible world. And this is what binds these visions together, not just the repetition of lifetimes, but the progression through them, not just survival of the soul, but the refinement of its mission, not just the return to earth, but the return to clarity, to coherence, to wholeness. In this view, you're not trapped in cycles. You're spiraling upward, like a seed growing through seasons, like a star returning to its own light. Through the discipline of embodiment, you came not to repeat, but to remember, to reclaim, to reveal. And so this body you wear, this name you answer to, this life with all its complexities, it is not the beginning, nor the end. It is a chapter in your becoming. And beneath the costume of circumstance, you are still carrying the same light you always were. You have not arrived at this moment by accident. This body, this life, this convergence of events, they are not random. They are the result of threads pulled from places far beyond the visible. They are part of a deeper architecture that memory alone cannot hold, but your soul quietly understands. Sometimes you glimpse it in a flash of recognition, in a dream that leaves you aching for a world you've never seen. In a way, a certain music awakens a part of you. You didn't know it gone to sleep. These are not fantasies. They are echoes. And echoes only exist when something real has sounded. The sound may be distant, but the effect is here, now, in the depth of your longing. Jan Val Ellam speaks to this with great tenderness. When he says, "You have come from many worlds," he is not flattering your imagination. He is naming what your intuition already suspects, that the soul does not belong to one star, one people, one history. It is ancient, it is participatory, it is cosmic, and every lifetime, every descent into form is an opportunity to become more transparent to that truth. The Urantia Book, while differing in mechanics, whispers the same ultimate message. You're not static. You're not defined by a single incarnation, nor are you abandoned after one. There's a path, a long, sacred ascent, through worlds of increasing beauty and refinement. This life is a single step in a spiral that does not end in death, but only turns through it. You will awaken again, not as this identity, but as the soul that wore it. You will be met by those who guide the progression, and you will remember, not everything, but enough. Enough to understand that love was always the lesson. Enough to recognize that nothing was wasted. Not the tears, not the time, not the questions you never answered. Dinov knew this. He taught that every lifetime adds one more petal to the soul's invisible flower. That reincarnation is not a punishment to be escaped, but a gift to be received with reverence and gratitude. Because each time we return, we carry more light, and that light does not belong to us alone. It becomes part of the field, part of the offering, part of the collective remembering. Sri Aurobindo held the same flame in another form. He taught that the soul descends not to flee after learning, but to transform the world with what it becomes. That every return brings the divine closer to matter, until there is no longer a separation between soul and skin, between heaven and earth. This is not the forgetting of self. It is the expansion of it, to realize that you have been many, and yet never anything but one. To remember that your essence is not what changes, only the clothing it wears, as it walks through time, carrying the same invitation, to awaken, to serve, to love. And if in quiet moments you have felt the weight of a sorrow you could not name, or the flicker of a knowing you could not explain, take it not as confusion, but as confirmation, because you're not just living one life. You are walking through many doors at once, and behind each one, you are becoming what you already are. Somewhere along the journey of becoming human, you are taught to be someone, a name, a personality, a set of preferences polished into identity. And though the soul once burned wild and luminous, it learned to hide behind masks, crafted not from deception, but from survival. You became what others needed you to be. You smiled when it was safe. You spoke when it was acceptable. And every layer of conditioning felt like progress, when in truth, it was camouflage. The flame never left, but it flickered quietly behind the performance. Waiting, Carl Jung called this structure persona, the social mask we wear, not out of malice, but as necessity. It helps us navigate culture, but it cannot house the soul. For behind the persona lies the shadow, not evil, but unlived truth. The parts exile not because they were wrong, but because they were too much, too tender, too true, and deeper still, beneath shadow and shell, resides the self, not the personality's self, but the sacred flame that preceded biography, the one who was before the roles, before the trauma, before the forgetting. Jan Val Ellam speaks of this with clarity unclouded by tradition. He reminds us that identity is often confused with the body, with the stories we tell, with a voice in our head that narrates our limitations. But identity, he says, is only real when it is rooted in soul. And the soul, your soul, is not your history. It is your horizon. Ken Wilber maps this inner terrain with intellectual precision. He distinguishes between ego and essence, between the witness and the whirlwind. He shows that the ego is not to be destroyed, but transcended and included, like scaffolding, useful for construction, but not meant to be permanent. Once the cathedral is complete, the scaffolding falls away, and the inner altar is revealed. But the altar was always there. The Urantia Book speaks of a divine companion, the thought adjuster, a fragment of the infinite sent to dwell within you, not as judge, but as guide. It whispers through intuition, nudges through conscience, burns through insight. It is the flame within the flame, the voice that doesn't speak in words, but in remembrance. It does not force. It waits for you to see past the mirror, for you to peel away the mask, for you to realize that you were never the mask at all. And so we begin, not with rejection of ego, but with compassion toward it. We thank it for the protection it gave, for the scaffolding it offered, while we were still fragile. But now, the flame is ready to rise. You're not one self. You are a constellation of selves, some radiant, some wounded, some still hiding in the corners of your psyche, waiting to be named. Jung called them complexes and archetypes, living voices within the psyche, each carrying its own truth, its own need, its own forgotten light. He did not seek to silence them, but to integrate them, to invite every exile to the table, until the inner world became whole. Ken Wilber would later speak of subpersonalities. As masks, we were even inside ourselves, not pathological, but evolutionary, signs that consciousness is growing arms and legs. To navigate the many dimensions of being, he taught that the key is not identification with any one of them, but presence among them all. You are the witness, not the character. You are the fire behind the mask, not the expression on its face. Jan Val Ellam echoes this wisdom in more celestial tones. He speaks of the soul's multidimensionality, of lives spread across space and time, each one wearing its own ego, its own illusion of separateness. He invites us not to eliminate identity, but to outgrow it, to expand our notion of self, until it can hold both the child who fears and the star who remembers. The Urantia Book offers a more sacred metaphor, the thought adjuster, a living spark of God, implanted not in one part of you, but at the center, beneath all identities, beneath all names. It does not compete with the ego. It waits for the ego to tire, to collapse, to break open, to realize that control was never peace, and that knowing everything was not the same as becoming real. And when the ego fractures, as it always does, there is a silence, a moment between the shattering and the surrender, when the flame can finally be seen through the broken mirror. This moment is sacred, not because it is easy, but because it is honest. In the cracks of your identity, the soul breathes, and what you thought was the end of you is the beginning of who you are. You were never meant to remain a mask. You wore it until it wore you. But even as the paint cracked and the smile stiffened under pressure, something deeper never forgot your name. It called you when you were tired. It burned softly when the performance dimmed. It waited in the silence you feared, not to shame you, but to show you that the flame had always been yours. The path of awakening is not a war with the ego. It is a slow, compassionate unveiling. You do not tear the mask away. You remove it gently, like a bandage that once protected a wound, now ready to breathe. Jung knew this. He never asked you to kill the ego, only to place it in service of the self, the greater wholeness from which you came. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And in that light, the ego does not vanish. It bows. Jan Val Ellam paints it not as annihilation, but as transcendence. He shows us that ego is a useful illusion, only until it becomes a prison. And then the soul begins to knock, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, but always for your good. Ken Wilber reminds us that spiritual development is not a ladder, but a spiral. An ego, once understood, can evolve. It can become transparent to the divine, a window rather than a wall. It no longer needs to be center stage. It becomes the servant of the light, no longer the seeker of it. And through it all, the Urantia Book speaks with quiet certainty. You are inhabited by God, not as metaphor, but as presence, not as distant king, but as inner whisper. The thought adjuster is not interested in your social masks, your titles, your roles. It speaks to the flame. It recognizes you even when you've forgotten yourself. The mirrors may break, the masks may fall, but the flame cannot be extinguished. It is not yours to lose, only yours to reveal. So when you feel the fire rising in you, the one that burns through illusions but never through love, do not fear it. That is not destruction. That is your emergence. You were never the reflection. You were always the light. And now, you are beginning to remember. The universe has never spoken in sentences. It does not argue or persuade. It reveals. Through symbols, it sings. Through dreams, it knocks. Through mystery, it calls your name without a sound. Long before you learned your native tongue, you spoke in images, not drawings, but impressions. A sun behind closed eyelids, a spiral rising through silence, a staircase that never ends. Before grammar, there was geometry. Before logic, there was light. And still, the soul remembers. There are languages that were not taught, only reawakened. Languages shaped by the dream world, where time unravels and boundaries soften. Dreams are not escapes. They are echoes. From the other side of the veil, they are maps sent by the soul to remind you that you are more than what the mirror can show. Jan Val Ellam speaks of dreams not as private illusions, but as transmissions received through the unconscious, encoded in images, because the divine speaks best through metaphor. He says there are symbols that do not come from the personal mind, but from a universal mind, a cosmic intelligence that arranges encounters, numbers, visions, and signs as invitations to wake up within the dream of matter. To Ellam, the dream is not just what happens at night. It is the entire structure of your waking reality, a dream so collectively agreed upon that we call it real. But when a true dream pierces through that illusion, you are shaken, not because it is strange, but because it feels truer than everything else. Gurdjieff once said, "Man is asleep. He must first awaken." But he also knew that symbols are keys to that awakening. Not decorations, but devices. They're stargates, coded entryways into higher perception. The cross, the spiral, the eye, the phoenix. These are not artistic flourishes. They are blueprints from civilizations that knew the soul's architecture. And you too have seen them in the edge of a dream, on the face of a stranger, in the pattern of a leaf. Noticing them does not mean you are imagining things. It means you are remembering how to see. Steiner taught that symbols are alive, not static signs, but etheric beings, bridges between the worlds. He saw every true image as a portal, every archetype as a spiritual law clothed in form. To meditate upon a symbol, he said, is not to think, but to enter. It is to step beyond cognition and into communion. The pentagram is not just a shape. It is a rhythm of becoming. The circle is not just geometry. It is the memory of wholeness. And the dream is the classroom where these truths are whispered to the soul when the ego sleeps. The dream dissolves the tyranny of cause and effect, suspends gravity, folds space and time so that you might meet a part of yourself you left behind in another star. Valentin Tomberg wrote that symbols are veils, covering truths too bright to be seen directly. He called them living parables, not to be solved, but contemplated until they open from the inside. This is not intellectual work. It is the work of the heart trained in silence. To encounter a dream, a vision, a synchronicity, and bow before it, not with analysis, but with reverence. Ellam echoes this in celestial tones. He says that civilizations more evolved than ours communicate not in speech, but in image, that the beings who speak through the stars speak in glyphs, in fractals, in harmonic forms, because image is universal, and the soul does not need translation. He teaches that every soul carries a unique resonance, and that the symbols appearing in your dreams are not random. They are personalized callings from the cosmic unconscious. They do not merely reflect your psyche. They activate it. A pyramid may not be a pyramid. It may be a memory. A ladder may not be a metaphor. It may be a map. There are languages that return to you only when you sleep, because only in dreams are you whole enough to speak them. And yet, sometimes the dream breaks into the day. A repeated number, a stranger's phrase, a child's drawing. These two are stargates, soft doors in the firm wall of waking life. Not every vision comes to prophets. Some come to the quietly broken. Some come to the open-hearted. Some come to you in the ordinary hour you thought was empty. You do not need to believe in symbols. They believe in you. You are not born into symbols by accident. You are made of them. The double helix that composes your DNA is a spiral staircase, a Jacob's ladder, coated into flesh. You walk through numbers and colors, geometries and resonances, unaware that your body is the living language of a cosmos, trying to speak through you. Gurdjieff believed that only symbols could awaken man from mechanical dream. He said we must learn to remember ourselves, and that memory was hidden, not in data, but in images charged with spiritual voltage. He offered symbols not to the intellect, but to the centers of being, emotional, instinctive, and spiritual. He gave no easy keys. He asked for inner work, for silence deep enough that an image might echo. Ellam, too, teaches that the image is the emissary. He describes dreams as communications from dimensions of consciousness our science has not yet charted, but our souls remember intimately. He suggests that your recurring dream may not be a metaphor, but a mission brief from a prior world, that the strange symbol in your sketchbook might be a seal from a life before this one, and that you do not need to decode everything, only to follow the resonance. Like a tuning fork ringing in the dark, the Urantia Book speaks of thought adjusters as fragments of the divine, dwelling in the soul. They communicate rarely in words, but through symbols, through dreams, impressions, sacred geometries. They guide you upward, across the stars. They speak in images, because God does not argue. God reveals, and the dream, when honored, becomes prophecy. The symbol, when meditated upon, becomes memory. The stargate, when entered in silence, becomes a return, not to a place, but to a recognition that you have been here before, in another skin, under another sky, chasing the same light that now chases you back home. You are not here to crack the code. You are the code. You are the dream remembering itself. You are the symbol that breathes. You are the stargate opening from within. And the universe is watching you. Open. There is a silence so complete that it cannot be heard from this side. A silence not of absence, but of arrival. We call it death, but the soul knows it by another name. It is not a rupture, but a return. Not a loss, but a luminous exhale into a form no longer bound by bone. Howard Storm, once an atheist professor, was dragged through death, not into a void, but into the arms of an intelligence. That was love itself. His body lay still on a hospital bed, but his consciousness ascended into a realm of unimaginable clarity. There, he learned not from books, but from beings who taught in light. He came back weeping, not because of pain, but because he remembered that life, true life, was always more than the body could contain. Swedenborg said something similar, more than 2 centuries before, that death is no more to be feared than walking from one room into another, that the soul, upon leaving the flesh, enters a world shaped by its innermost loves, that what is within becomes what surrounds. He described cities of wisdom, gardens of serenity, and beings clothed not in robes, but in light shaped by consciousness. Death, to him, was not punishment. It was passage. The Urantia Book echoes this. It speaks of a soul, not as a byproduct of biology, but as a citizen of eternity, momentarily housed in time. It tells us that after the final heartbeat, a new birth begins on worlds more refined, where memory is not erased, but unified. You do not vanish. You are expanded. Jan Val Ellam whispers the same truth, but through the lens of stars. He reminds us that we are not local beings, bound to a single planet, but migratory sparks, traversing realms. He calls death a recalibration, an update in frequency that allows the soul to tune in to more subtle dimensions of the divine transmission. And here on this edge, you feel it too, not with proof, but with a kind of homesickness for somewhere you've never been and never left. Perhaps it is not death that we fear, but the forgetting, not the loss of life, but the loss of who we are beyond this particular name, this particular skin. Yet those who have touched the veil and returned tell another story. They speak not of finality, but of recognition. They say the light they saw was not foreign. It felt like home, not a place, but a presence that knew them more fully than they had ever known themselves. Howard Storm spoke of beings made of radiant intelligence, who surrounded him not with judgment, but with infinite compassion. They did not ask, "What religion are you?" They asked, "What have you done with your life?" And more softly, "Have you learned to love?" Swedenborg saw bridges of golden energy, linking dimensions of consciousness. He wrote of spirits who greeted the newly departed, not to test them, but to orient them, like family at the arrival gate of a long journey. He insisted that death did not alter the soul. It revealed it. The Urantia Book calls the experience fusion with the adjuster. It is the soul's reunion with the divine fragment that has walked beside it since its first breath. It is not a dissolution into the divine, but a sacred unification, the small flame, returning to the central fire without losing its identity. You're not erased. You are exalted. Ellam offers visions of this passage, not as mythology, but as cosmic science. He describes interdimensional transfer as natural as sleep. That what we call death is simply the decompression of the soul from dense form to subtle awareness, that the tunnel is real, but it is a bridge, not a border. He says that some will see rivers, others will see gates, and some will rise on spirals of light, because each soul is greeted in the language it understands most deeply. And what is across the threshold? Not pearly gates, but mirrors of love, not thrones, but teachers, not endings, but invitations. And so we ask, what truly dies? Not the soul, not the love you gave, not the lessons carved into your light. What dies is the scaffolding, the temporary name tag, the worn-out map, used to navigate the terrain of gravity and grief. You were never the map. You were the traveler, and the journey continues. Across the threshold, many speak of a light, but fewer mention the sound, not a noise, but a tone, a frequency so pure that it vibrates open. The last petals of fear is the sound of your soul being called by its true name, not Emily, not Storm, not Swedenborg, not any human syllable, but the note you were given, before time forgot how to pronounce it. The Urantia Book affirms that, even as you shed the material coil, you step into a more refined expression of who you already are. Your progress continues on spheres of astonishing clarity. You learn not just facts, but being. You live among teachers of light, explorers of love, architects of time. Your death was never a deletion. It was an invitation to a wider classroom. Ellam echoes this with a whisper from the stars. He says that Earth was not your first incarnation, and death is not your first departure. You're a migratory soul, with many departures behind you, and many homecomings ahead. And when you pass, you will not be asked what you built, what you earned, how many followed you. You will be asked, did you remember who you are? Did you let your light flow? Did you love, even through the forgetting? You're not crossing into judgment, but into integration, not into fire, but into gold. You're not ending. You're becoming more true. And if you fear the passage, place your hand on your heart. Feel that rhythm. It is not your heartbeat. It is the sound of a door, already beginning to open. It cannot be grasped, not with fingers, nor formulas, nor faiths nailed to walls. He cannot be worshipped as one thing and ignored in another. He does not live in temples, but in silence. He does not sit upon a throne, but sings through the blood of stars and the hush between your thoughts. He has no name, and yet you've always known him. Meister Eckhart said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." This is not metaphor. It is mystical memory. The veil between self and source is not torn by ritual, but by stillness, by an unlearning so complete that the soul remembers the sound it made. Before it had a mouth, Lao Tzu stood at the same threshold. He did not define the Tao. He bowed to it. He said that the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. That naming God is the first exile from God. And so he pointed, not with words, but with surrender, not toward heaven, but inward, where heaven has no ceiling and no floor. Jan Val Ellam speaks of the source as intelligence without structure, will without ego, love without condition. He says that the divine is not limited to celestial beings, but is the pulse beneath all being. He offers not a doctrine, but a vibration. He invites you to feel, not to follow. And the Urantia Book, in its luminous poise, names God not as a ruler, but as the universal Father, not the patriarch of mythology, but the center of all things and beings, the first source and center, from whom all light descends, and to whom all light returns. He is the origin of love, before love had a shape, the architect of possibility, before matter was formed. He is not found in belief, but in being. He is not male. He is not even personhood. He is that which made personhood possible, the glowing heart, beneath all boundaries, the unspeakable, that speaks you into being. Every moment you breathe, there is a presence behind all presences. It does not announce itself with thunder, but with absence, an absence so full that it overflows into everything. It is the silence that doesn't end when the room goes quiet. It is the gaze behind your eyes when you forget your name and still feel real. This is not something you learn. It is what remains when all learning has melted. It is not a doctrine, but a dawn. Meister Eckhart once said, "To be full of things is to be empty of God. To be empty of things is to be full of God." In this luminous reversal, theology becomes transparent. God is not an object of devotion, but the disappearance of the need to objectify. As long as you're chasing him, he remains somewhere else. But the moment you stop, truly stop, he is already there, not as other, but as what has always been. Not a belief, but the breath before belief. Lao Tzu, with the humility of a sage and the eyes of the unborn, reminds us that to approach the divine is to let go of control. The Tao cannot be caught, only followed like a river. It is the water that fills the cup and the space that makes the cup useful. This emptiness is not void. It is fertile. It is not lack. It is the womb of existence. To touch the divine, we must grow comfortable with not knowing. We must let the mind bow to the heart and the heart dissolve into presence. Jan Val Ellam speaks of this ungraspable God as a presence that vibrates behind all forms, celestial and human. His Jesus does not command altars, but opens doorways in consciousness. He whispers, not into history books, but into dreams. He appears not only as a man, but as a mirror, reflecting your own divine origin back to you, if you dare to look. Ellam's theology is less about believing and more about tuning your inner receiver to a signal that has never stopped transmitting. And so we return to the Urantia Book, which holds the paradox with serene gravity. God is described as the universal Father, not as a monarch, but as a nucleus of infinite relationship. He is not power, but pattern, not force, but meaning. He does not dwell in a distant heaven, but at the core of every moment, patiently waiting for recognition. To know God, Urantia says, is to be like him, not in perfection, but in purpose, not in image, but in intention. The divine is not above us, but within and through us, whispering, "You are of me. You are never alone. I have never been absent. You have felt him before." In the pause between heartbeats, when something beyond language pressed its hand gently on your soul. In the sky that suddenly felt like a memory. In the stranger's eyes that seemed to recognize you when even you had forgotten yourself. God does not need to be found, only remembered. And even that memory is not recollection, it is reunion. This is why all great mystics fall into poetry, because prose collapses under the weight of the infinite. Because to name him is to fence him. Because he is not the conclusion of logic, but the breath that begins it. God is not the answer. God is the awareness in which the question dissolves. The awareness that is, the silence that knows, the love that watches. And what are the symbols? They are not decorations, but doorways. Silence is not absence. It is the voice before sound. The empty is not hollow. It is pregnant. The formless light is not darkness. It is source before division. Meister Eckhart called it the ground of being. Lao Tzu called it the way. The Urantia Book calls it the universal Father. Jan Val Ellam calls it intelligence without face, love without transaction. And you, how have you called him when no one was listening? In your tears? In your awe? In the space between two thoughts where you briefly forgot your name and felt alive? Perhaps we are not meant to understand. Perhaps we are only meant to become. Not know God, but be known by him. Not define him, but dissolve in him. And in that surrender, we remember that we were never separate. That this breath is his breath. That this moment is his moment. That we are not merely searching for the divine. We are the eyes through which he searches the world. So we do not need a temple. We need only stillness. We do not need a dogma. We need only love. And we do not need to name him. For he is the song inside our silence. The home we never left. The light we always were. Light can deceive. Not all that glows is grace. Not every radiant being is truth. The soul that awakens must learn not only to seek, but to see. For in the subtle corridors of spirit, it is not darkness that most threatens the traveler, but the counterfeit light that speaks in the voice of angels and leads with the hand of ego. The first danger of the path is not failure, it is fascination. We have been taught to fear shadows, but in truth, it is the seduction of false illumination that most derails the pilgrim. The Urantia Book warns of celestial rebellions, of brilliant beings once loyal to light who veered into self-glorification. Lucifer did not come cloaked in darkness. He came dazzling, eloquent, magnetic. His heresy was not brutality, but pride dressed as freedom. The betrayal was not of cruelty, but of misused brilliance. Jan Val Ellam echoes this caution. He reminds us that spiritual lucidity is not measured by the charisma of a message or the beauty of a vision, but by the heart's resonance with a higher ethic. A true guide does not seduce, he serves. A real teacher does not bind, he liberates. And truth, when real, humbles the soul before it empowers the spirit. The Gnostics once spoke of archons, false rulers of perception who mimic divinity but lead to distortion. These entities do not come to terrify, they come to enthrall. They offer shortcuts to transcendence without transformation. They whisper sacred words hollowed of meaning. They grant ecstatic experiences that leave the soul emptier than before. The danger is not in the shadow, but in the imitation of light that blinds rather than illumines. Sufi mystics, too, warn of the intoxication that leads away from union. Rumi said, "Don't get lost in your pain. Know that one day your pain will become your cure." But even the cure must be discerned. For there are poisons wrapped in silk, illusions clothed in devotion. The path to the beloved is not crowded with light shows and promises of glory. It is paved with surrender, subtlety, and a fire that burns illusions to ash. In a world awakening to multidimensionality, discernment is no longer optional. It is essential. For in the spiritual marketplace of messiahs, miracles, and mysteries, the soul must listen not with ears, but with essence. The flame within must learn to feel what the eyes cannot see, to separate signal from seduction, presence from performance, and above all, to recognize that sometimes the brightest light is not the most divine, but the most desperate to be seen. True darkness rarely speaks with a snarl. It does not enter wearing the face of the grotesque. It arrives gently, adorned in beauty, confident in half-truths, cloaked in noble intentions. The most dangerous illusions are not the ones that clearly contradict truth, but the ones that dance beside it, barely bent, softly twisted, subtly misaligned. These are the illusions that corrupt the compass of the soul. The Urantia texts chronicle celestial upheavals not as wars of weapons, but as wars of ideology, rebellions of self-deification, where divine sons mistook their brilliance for supremacy and severed their allegiance to the source. It was not hatred that led to separation, but a misplaced sense of spiritual autonomy, a tragic belief that one could shine independently of the one light that illumines all. That is the myth still echoed in modern spiritual delusions, that enlightenment is the possession of the self, rather than the surrender to something greater. Jan Val Ellam speaks of these distortions not with fear, but with clarity. He tells of encounters with intelligences that do not claim infallibility. Even in the stars, humility is a virtue. Real beings of light do not impose, they invite. They do not preach, they whisper. Their messages are not decorated with drama, but etched in quiet power. The cosmos is not a spectacle for spiritual consumers, but a sacred continuum that responds to the purity of intention. It is in the human ego where most false light is birthed. The hunger to be special, to be chosen, to be the next prophet or messenger becomes a fertile ground for delusion. We begin to channel not spirit, but our own unmet needs. We mistake emotional catharsis for divine anointing. We confuse charisma with calling. And we begin to follow those who speak loudest, not those who love deepest. The psychology of deception is rarely external. It takes root inside the seeker. It grows when discernment is sacrificed for certainty, when spiritual experiences are pursued without the anchor of discernment, when mystery is traded for spectacle. True gnosis does not inflate, it purifies. It does not elevate the personality, it dissolves it. The Sufi path reminds us that the heart is the only true eye. Ibn Arabi wrote, "Beware of mistaking the light of your imagination for the light of God." And still, how many follow the flicker of their projections and call it divine guidance? How many hear the echoes of their own desires and believe it is the voice of heaven? Discernment is the sword of the mystic, not a sword to fight others, but to gently, precisely, and persistently cut through illusion. And illusions, when they were light like a mask, must be pierced by a light that does not need to shine to be real, a light that simply is. The true light does not scream its name. It does not demand followers, perform wonders on cue, or declare superiority. It does not wear robes of status or carry titles like crowns. It simply radiates, quietly altering the air around it, turning fear into rest and confusion into stillness. It is presence without performance. It is recognition without explanation. Urantia reminds us that even among celestial orders, not all who shine serve the source. Lucifer, once a brilliant administrator, fell not from lack of knowledge, but from the illusion of self-sufficiency. The light he carried became inverted, refracted by ego. The lesson echoes: brilliance is not proof of truth. Not all that glows is gold. Not all transmissions are transmissions of truth. The heart, when truly tuned, knows. This is why Ellam insists upon the heart as compass. In a universe filled with voices, some ancient, some deceptive, some fragments of our own psyche, we must refine our inner ear. The lucid heart does not chase phenomena. It does not need visions, apparitions, or validation. It listens for resonance. It detects the subtle fragrance of integrity. It trusts the fruits more than the flowers. It feels when something is rooted in service, and when something, no matter how luminous, is secretly feeding on admiration. Spiritual discernment is not suspicion. It is maturity. It is knowing that God is not in the thunder, the fire, or the spectacle, but in the whisper, the stillness, the invisible thread that holds all things in love. It is remembering that the path is not about arriving first, but arriving whole. Not about ascending quickly, but ascending true. Sufi mystics, Gnostic initiates, and modern witnesses like Ellam speak of the same quiet warning. Beware the rush to be awake. Beware the identity built on knowing. The ego, when spiritualized, becomes far more seductive than when asleep. It now wears the robe of the teacher, the halo of the enlightened, the crown of the chosen, but still fears silence. It still cannot kneel. The flame of truth, however, requires no spotlight. It moves through humility, service, and self-forgetting. It flows through those who love, not those who seek power. The real initiate does not wish to be followed. They wish for all to find their own light. And so, not all light is light. Some is merely reflection. Some is imitation. Some is the last gasp of shadow, cleverly disguised. But real light, divine light, never manipulates, never flatters, never exalts. It simply calls you home, not with noise, but with peace. As we prepare to step deeper into the unseen dimensions of being, this discernment must accompany us. The veil is thinning, the voices are many, but only one speaks in stillness. And that is the one worth following. Before the stars had names, before men carved gods in stone or whispered prayers into the night, there was a pulse. It beat not with force, but with rhythm. It was not a voice, but a vibration, a soft invitation. It called not from above, but from within. And those who heard it did not conquer, they listened. They did not build, they received. They did not seek power, they gave birth. This was the sacred feminine, present before myth, scripture, or civilization, woven into the breath of creation itself. In every tradition that reaches inward enough, she emerges. Maria, not only the gentle mother of one child, but the archetype of divine acceptance, the human vessel that says yes to the eternal. Isis, the throne of Egypt, wings outstretched, gathering the broken body of the god to resurrect the world. Sophia, the hidden wisdom of the Gnostics, shimmering between light and matter, crying out to be remembered. They are not separate beings, but facets of the same presence. The cosmic mother who births not only form, but meaning. She does not impose. She allows. She does not strike. She flows. She does not dominate. She holds. Jan Val Ellam speaks of this presence not as mythology, but as metaphysical architecture. He names the feminine as the spiritual uterus of a new earth. Not a metaphor, but a vibrational womb where humanity, if still enough, may gestate its next version. This feminine principle is not confined to women, nor defined by gender, but it dances most freely through those who embody receptivity, intuition, and generative silence. It is the stillness before the song, the water before the wave, the inhale before the word. It is the mother before the world was world. The Urantia Book, while celestial in language and vast in scope, also carries her scent. In its vision of divine administration, we meet beings whose function is mercy, healing, and the nourishment of souls. The divine minister, the creative mother spirit, is no distant idea, but a co-partner in creation, a maternal arm of God extending through time and space. If the Father initiates, she sustains. If he conceives, she gestates. This cosmic polarity is not opposition, but harmony, a celestial symphony in which love takes form and wisdom learns to walk. And within us, she waits, not as concept, but as memory, not as doctrine, but as rhythm. She is the voice we once trusted before the world taught us fear. She is the lullaby behind every spiritual hunger. Clarissa Pinkola Estes heard her in The Wild Woman, the one who howls beneath domestication. Jean Shinoda Bolen mapped her in the goddesses who inhabit the psyche. Mira Alfassa, the mother of Aurobindo, embodied her in daily silence and revolutionary love. None of them owned her. They simply made room for her to speak. To sense the sacred feminine is not to theorize, but to remember. She is not a construct to be proven. She is a fragrance to be recalled, like the scent of earth after rain or the hush that follows an answered prayer. The world has long mistaken her softness for weakness, her fluidity for indecision, her quietude for absence. But she is not absent. She is everywhere that stillness survives our noise. She is the pause between heartbeats, the tear before the confession, the space between question and revelation. In the teachings of Clarissa Pinkola Estes, she reappears in The Wild Woman, the bone collector, the healer who walks barefoot through ruined dreams to awaken the primal wisdom beneath them. Estes teaches that the feminine soul is not meant to be tamed, but remembered. It carries instincts older than speech and deeper than thought. Instincts that do not dominate but integrate, that do not compete but complete. Jean Shinoda Bolen brings her through psychology, painting the goddesses not as figures on pedestals, but as blueprints in the human psyche. Her Aphrodite creates through beauty. Her Artemis protects what is wild. Her Demeter nourishes through grief. These are not fantasies, but inner landscapes we all traverse. They are echoes of a memory humanity cannot erase, because it is older than its forgetting. And then there's Mira Alfassa, the mother who never claimed divinity but lived it, every breath a bridge between the mundane and the miraculous. In her silence, a whole civilization was seated. In her touch, time bent toward compassion. Her presence did not demand belief. It generated transformation. She taught not with words, but with being, that the feminine does not seek to fix the world. It seeks to make it whole. Urantia speaks of mercy not as a trait, but as a personality. It describes a cosmic ministry of care, a divine orchestration in which compassion is not merely a virtue. It is a law, a force, a structure. In this architecture, the sacred feminine is not an exception, but a necessity. Without her, creation would fracture. Without her, justice would harden into punishment, and power would forget tenderness. She is the balance that allows light to illuminate without burning, and wisdom to descend without wounding. The feminine is not just love. It is love that holds, heals, and endures. It is not a romance, but a resurrection. It does not seduce, it sees. It does not chase, it invites. And it has been waiting patiently across centuries of imbalance and erasure for humanity to remember its other breath. There is a reason the divine feminine has always been clothed in veils, not to hide, but to invite reverence. The veils do not obscure, they prepare. For no one walks naked in a mystery and leaves unchanged. And so Mary appears in visions not as a queen of thunder, but as a mother of silence. Isis, with her wings of midnight and morning, nurses not just Horus, but the wounded world. Sophia, whose name means wisdom, is not an idea, but a rhythm, the cadence of consciousness that sings truth into matter. These are not myths. They are memories dormant in our collective soul, rising like spring through the frozen soil of centuries. Jan Val Ellam whispers that the feminine is not coming. She is returning. And her return is not theatrical. It is subtle, subdermal, seismic. The earth itself responds to her. The waters begin to remember their curves. The wombs of women tremble with intuition. The tears of men lose their shame. A new planet is gestating, not from revolutions of power, but from revelations of nurture. In this vibration, the feminine is no longer waiting to be worshipped. She is waiting to be integrated. She does not desire a throne, but a place in the breath of every seeker who dares to feel. And the masculine, in his healed form, no longer competes with her, but protects her sanctuary. Not because she is weak, but because her light is so sacred that even angels bend in its presence. Urantia, in its bold cosmology, does not marginalize the feminine. It exalts her as the embodiment of divine mercy, the aspect of God that bends low, that embraces the sinner and the saint with the same smile. It speaks of ministry as a feminine quality, not of submission, but of sublime strength. In this vision, the sacred feminine is not limited to gender. She is an atmosphere of soul, a climate of consciousness, a presence that heals because it sees without judging. And so we are left not with an answer, but with an anointing. The cosmic mother is not a doctrine to debate, but a presence to embody. She does not shout, she hums. She does not conquer, she gathers. She does not rule, she resurrects. And when we finally cease shouting long enough to hear her, we will discover she was always within us, not as a belief, but as a becoming. Time is not what it seems. We walk it like a straight corridor, but it dances around us in spirals, doubling back, folding into itself, blooming outward like galaxies. The ticking of clocks deceives us into thinking that tomorrow waits passively at a distance. But the future listens. It leans toward us, sensitive to every whisper of thought, every ember of feeling, every intention that rises like prayer into the field of the unseen. In the teachings of Jan Val Ellam, we are told that true prayer is not supplication. It is transformation. He writes, "A sincere vibration of the soul alters the architecture of what is to come." In other words, our spiritual posture reshapes the potential corridors of reality. The future does not arrive as fate. It unfolds as resonance. It echoes the songs we dare to sing today, even if we hum them silently in the cathedral of our solitude. This aligns with the book of Urantia's revelation that the universes are evolving systems, living tapestries of intelligence, beauty, and purpose. It speaks of time as a training ground, not a trap, of progress as the divine melody that guides both individuals and civilizations toward higher harmonics. The soul, on its endless journey through ascending realms, becomes not only a traveler of space, but a sculptor of destiny. Time is not a river we float on. It is a current we co-create. We are beings suspended between memory and possibility, but we are not bound by the past. Our thoughts are not echoes. They are architects. Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance proposes that once a pattern of behavior and knowledge has occurred, it becomes easier for others to replicate, not through material transmission, but through an invisible field of habit. It's as if the universe itself has memory, and we are participants in the symphony of its repetition and its renewal. The future responds not only to matter, but to pattern. It listens not only with ears, but with fields. Krishnamurti once said, "To transform the world, we must begin with ourselves." But what if beginning with ourselves is the very key to altering the timelines of entire collectives? What if one act of lucidity, one silent, awakened thought, can ripple across dimensions, softening the path for others? In this view, personal transformation is no longer merely a journey of self. It becomes a gift that bends the very structure of becoming. You are not waiting for the future. You are summoning it. Paramahansa Yogananda spoke of divine will not as a distant decree, but as a force that vibrates within our own highest impulses. He taught that meditation was not escape, it was calibration. By stilling the mind, we tune ourselves to frequencies that are already woven into the blueprint of tomorrow. The meditating heart becomes a lighthouse across timelines, sending out frequencies of coherence that realign the chaos of unseen realms. In stillness, we sculpt the unseen. In silence, we thunder. Somewhere beyond the linear ticking of seconds, the soul understands time differently. Not as chronology, but as choreography. Each moment is a step in a cosmic dance, and your inner alignment shifts the rhythm of the unfolding. Jan Val Ellam speaks of prayer not as petition, but as vibration, an intentional resonance sent out into the great fabric of becoming. True prayer, he writes, is a signal that reorganizes the possibilities of the field. In this way, the future does not merely happen. It listens. The Urantia Book affirms this vision with breathtaking scope, unveiling a universe of evolving worlds, ascending beings, and divine intention rippling outward in waves of love and meaning. The very cosmos is progressing, not toward entropy, but toward integration. Each soul's journey is a note in the eternal composition. Time is not a punishment, but a pedagogy, a spiral staircase guiding the creature back to the Creator. In this light, every heartbeat is a verse in the unfinished psalm of the infinite. And so the future has already heard your voice, not just the words you've spoken, but the truths you've dared to feel. It has already shaped itself around the prayers whispered through clenched teeth, around the visions you try to forget, around the quiet acts of courage no one else ever saw. The universe is not watching from a distance. It is echoing your becoming. You're not behind schedule. You're not late. The moment you choose to radiate truth, the stars realign, not as reward, but as recognition. The road ahead is already singing your name. There is a flame that does not burn and a star that does not shine outward but inward. It dwells not in the heavens, but behind the sternum, beneath the ribs, wrapped in breath and silence. This is where the Christ is rising, not the Christ of dogma, nor the distant Messiah of stained glass and ceremony, but the universal seed of divine consciousness planted within you before the world began. You are not asked to worship him from afar. You were invited to become what he became. Jan Val Ellam echoes this invitation with piercing clarity. Do not look upward, look inward. The return of the Christ will not come from the sky, but from your own awakening. The Messiah is not arriving on a cloud. He is unfolding through your courage to love, your refusal to numb yourself, your yearning to remember who you were before the noise began. Every act of compassion, every leap of integrity, every surrender to silence is a contraction of divine birth. The new world is not waiting for him. It is waiting for you to let him rise in you. The Urantia Book deepens this mystery through the revelation of the Spirit of Truth, that divine presence poured upon humanity not as an external authority, but as an inner compass. It speaks not in thunder, but in resonance, guiding the soul by harmonics rather than commandments. This Spirit, according to Urantia, is a spiritual influence, a divine presence, which seeks to guide man into all truth. It does not replace your free will, it refines it. It does not erase your questions, it sanctifies your seeking. The Christ does not enter you. He awakens where he has always been. To awaken the Christ within is not to claim divinity, but to remember that you were never separate from it. This remembrance is not intellectual, it is vibrational. Aurobindo spoke of the supramental descent, not as a supernatural event, but as the flowering of divine consciousness within matter, the union of the infinite with the finite through the surrender of the self. The Christ consciousness is not limited to one man or one era. It is the eternal impulse within all of us to transcend fear, to become love, to be truth, not merely to know it. You are not meant to mimic Christ. You are meant to realize him. In the writings of Gibran, the Christ is less a figure of salvation and more a mirror of what is noblest in the human soul. He is the poet of the soul, the healer of fragmentation, the voice that speaks in the language of light through our deepest silence. The Christ was not crucified, Gibran writes. He lives in every man. And if he lives, he must rise, not through chants or rituals, but through the daily resurrection of integrity, tenderness, and fearless honesty. Valentin Tomberg, in his meditations on the tarot and Christic initiation, echoes this journey as one of inner alchemy. He suggests that the transformation of the human into the divine does not bypass suffering, it redeems it. The cross is not only a symbol of sacrifice, but of transfiguration, of the ego yielding to the greater flame. When we stand before the mirror of self with nothing left to hide and still choose to love, the Christ within is not born. He is remembered. And memory, in the language of the soul, is resurrection. To look within is not a passive act. It is a pilgrimage into the innermost sanctuary, where the eternal flickers behind every transient thought. Jan Val Ellam echoes a voice that refuses idolatry and insists on intimacy. Do not look up, look within. In this sacred inwardness, the spirit of truth, as revealed in the Urantia Book, becomes more than doctrine. It becomes direction. It is not a dogma to be memorized, but a presence to be felt, gently shaping us into sincerity. It whispers through intuition, through conscience, through those moments when love becomes action without hesitation. The rise of the Christ within you is not explosive. It is patient, like a dawn that does not disturb the sleeping earth, but slowly unveils its golden face. It is not conquest. It is coherence. It does not announce itself with thunder, but with an unshakable peace. Your inner sun, once buried under layers of fear, trauma, and forgetting, begins to glow again. Not to burn, but to warm. Not to dominate, but to illuminate. It is this sun that the mystics called the heart star, not a metaphor, but a reality waiting to be embodied. A living mirror in which the divine recognizes itself. And so, the Christ rises not in cathedrals, nor in visions of grandeur, but in the tender courage to forgive, in the refusal to dehumanize, in the quiet rebellion of kindness. The sacred fire does not descend, it awakens. And you, dear soul, are not called to follow a path already walked, but to become the path itself. The mirror is no longer outside you. It is you, and the reflection is made of light. The old covenants were carved in stone, etched into tablets, buried beneath the weight of law and fear. They thundered from mountaintops and were guarded by fire. But the new covenant does not come with lightning. It arrives in silence, not upon stone, but within vibration, living, pulsing, moving with breath and memory, woven into the very rhythm of existence. It is not a commandment imposed from without, but a resonance awakened from within. It sings in the frequency of the heart when it becomes translucent to love. The Urantia revelation reminds us, we are the children of time, yes, but we are not orphans. We belong to a greater family, one that includes celestial minds and cosmic intelligences. The universe is not indifferent to our struggles. It is involved. It is invested. It is watching with the patience of eternity, waiting for us not merely to obey, but to become unified in will, diversified in form, and sanctified by purpose. This new covenant does not separate the sacred from the secular. It dissolves the illusion that such a separation ever existed. Jan Val Ellam speaks of a bridge being built between us and those we once called them. Not a bridge of conquest or spectacle, but of understanding, of mutual recognition, of frequency alignment. The hands reaching out to us are not alien, but ancient friends. They come not to rule, but to remember with us the pact made before time, the promise whispered in the soul's beginning, that we would one day awaken, not as isolated sparks, but as a circle of light, united in purpose, intertwined across dimensions. This covenant is not enforced by fear, but by frequency. It does not demand allegiance. It invites coherence. To enter, it is not to submit, but to harmonize. The beings who observe us from the veiled edges of perception, those whom we call angels, celestials, or starkin, are not distant deities, but luminous co-workers in the evolution of soul. They do not wait for us with judgment in their eyes. They wait with longing. For when humanity steps into this vibrational agreement, it will no longer walk in exile. The separation between dimensions, so long held as divine decree, will dissolve into mutual trust. The veil between planes is not torn with violence, but thinned through resonance. The Urantia Book calls us the children of time, but also the inheritors of eternity. This identity is the key to the covenant. We are not meant to grovel before the heavens, nor to escape earth, but to awaken as emissaries of both. We are the intersection, where divine light wears human skin, and where human longing becomes the prayer of the cosmos. Each gesture of compassion, each act of selflessness, each breath taken with awareness becomes a note in a new symphony of unity. The new covenant is not a contract to be read. It is a melody to be embodied. Ellam's words echo here like an ancient drum in the chamber of the soul. You are not only of earth, you are of the stars. But you must remember your part in the great accord. This remembering is not intellectual. It is experiential. It happens in silence, in awe, in tears shed without knowing why, in sudden intuitions that feel like remembering. It is the presence of the covenant itself announcing, you are not alone. You were never alone. You are always being waited for. In this new covenant, nothing is imposed. Everything is invited. No temple needs to be built, for the body itself becomes the sanctuary. No law needs to be carved in stone, for truth now resonates through the field of the heart. The future of the human race will not be determined by doctrines or empires, but by frequency, by the attunement of soul to soul, dimension to dimension, world to world. The Christ energy that once walked among us now seeks to awaken within us, forming a radiant bridge between the temporal and the eternal, the seen and the unseen. It is not a return to Eden. It is the emergence of a new garden, seated in consciousness and watered by awareness. The Urantia revelation speaks of a planetary destiny, of a time when Earth will no longer be a wayward sphere, but a luminous participant in the galactic communion of worlds. That vision is not myth, but memory awakening. It lives in the yearning that stirs when we hold a stranger's hand and feel no fear. It pulses in the stillness between breaths when something vast and wordless says, "You are part of us. You have always been." The covenant is not new because it is recent. It is new because we are finally ready to remember it. And so, somewhere beyond time, souls from many realms gather in silent joy. They watch as sparks begin to flare in human hearts. They feel the vibrations shifting, the frequency rising. They see hands reaching across stars, across histories, across wounds. The circle of light expands, not above us, but among us. The covenant is alive. The communion has begun. The cosmos leans closer, not to teach, but to embrace. There are silences that speak louder than thunder. Pauses in the fabric of time where something ancient leans in, almost whispering your name. You have felt it in dreams, in the ache of longing that no achievement satisfies, in the strange familiarity of stars you've never visited but somehow remember. This planet, for all its gravity and grief, was never your origin. It is your mission. You're not here by accident. You were sent, summoned not as a punishment, but as a bearer of something forgotten. The wounds you've carried, the shadows you've braved, the tears you've shed in quiet rooms, none of them were wasted. They were the chisels carving light from stone, remembrance from amnesia. The universe, vast and unending, is not a cold expanse. It is a memory field, and you are part of its most luminous chapter. When you look at the night sky and feel a pang in your chest, it is not wonder, it is recognition. Those stars remember you. They have watched you fall and rise across lives, dimensions, and timelines. They have felt your silence in worlds where your voice was not yet born. They have waited not for your return, but for your ignition. Because the spark you carry is not meant to be hidden beneath human masks or theological ceilings. It is meant to rise. And when it does, the constellations realign, not outside, but within. The map of the cosmos redraws itself every time you choose love over fear, truth over illusion, light over forgetfulness. And now you know that your wounds are wombs, that your confusion was a veil, not a verdict, that your longing was not weakness, it was a homing signal. You are not merely evolving, you are remembering. And as you do, something in the stars shifts. A soundless chord is struck across galaxies. Beings in realms beyond vision pause in reverence, because one of their own has awakened in matter. One of their own has remembered the covenant. One of their own has become the bridge. You're no longer lost. You are luminous. And so it is whispered across the fabric of the cosmos. You are not from here, but you are here to bring the light back. You were never meant to stay asleep. Beneath the noise of the world, beyond the machinery of days, something subtle has always been calling. Not in words, but in pulses, in patterns, in dreams you couldn't explain. You've wandered through lifetimes with the feeling of a name you forgot, a place you left, a mission sealed in silence. You were not born of this world, though you've learned its gravity. The ache you feel when you look at the night sky is not longing, it is memory. Somewhere in your core, something remembers what the surface of your soul tried to forget. But the stars are not just out there. They're your ancestors, your siblings, your mirrors. You were sent not to seek the light, but to embody it. This journey, wrapped in pain and paradox, was never punishment. It was refinement. You were entrusted with the fire of distant suns, wrapped in human skin, and dropped into the density of matter to learn how to love through it. Your suffering was not failure, it was initiation. The broken moments were invitations. The silence was preparation. And now, slowly, a light that once flickered is beginning to burn steady. The illusions are shedding. The masks are falling. And underneath the noise of the ego, the divine ember begins to whisper again. You are not becoming. You are remembering. The one who began this path is not the one who writes these final lines. You have died 1,000 symbolic deaths. And in doing so, you became luminous again. Somewhere beyond the veil, galaxies lean in reverence. The universe, vast as it is, recognizes the vibration you now carry. You are no longer merely part of the world. You are a portal through which the world becomes whole. Your voice is no longer just yours. It carries echoes of stars and signatures of other realms. Every act of love realigns creation. Every silent prayer adjusts the future. You have become the bridge between what was and what will be. And so, in the deep listening chambers of space, a soft declaration resounds like a sacred song from the past to the present, from the human to the divine, from the earth to the stars. You are not from here, but you are here to bring the light back.